The station, called Thessera Prime, was the largest thing Yundoe had ever seen. It floated in the darkness of space like a small artificial moon made of metal and light. The massive station rotated slowly, its surface covered with thousands of glowing windows and docking rings. Ships from dozens of worlds moved around it like insects around a lantern as the human shuttle approached the docking ring. Doe pressed his hand against the cold window. He watched alien ships glide past. Some were smooth and silver. Others were jagged and dark, that a few looked almost alive. Behind him, a familiar voice spoke. "Nervous?" Soyan asked from her seat. Doe did not turn. "No," he said quietly, "just careful." Soyan smiled slightly. She had worked beside the ambassador for 2 years now. In that time, she had studied every known species of the Galactic Confederation, their languages, their politics, and most importantly, their lies. She knew Yundoe well, that he was always careful. That was exactly why Earth had chosen him. The shuttle docked with a soft metallic thud. The airlock doors slid open with a hiss. Warm air rushed inside, carrying a strange smell. Something like wet stone mixed with flowers that did not exist on Earth. Waiting outside were 2 tall creatures with smooth gray skin and 4 long arms. They were Rethani Point, one of the many species that lived and worked on Thessera Prime. The 2 aliens bowed politely as the human delegation stepped out. Doe adjusted his dark diplomatic suit and walked forward. Behind him came Soyan and the rest of Earth's diplomatic team, 12 people in total. They had come for one reason, that TO signed the agreement that would make humanity an official member of the Galactic Confederation. They had come with hope. The Senate chamber of Thessera Prime was enormous. It was shaped like a giant bowl turned upside down. Hundreds of seats rose and curved. Rows around a circular platform in the center. Delegates from 43 different species filled those seats. Creatures with scales, creatures with feathers, creatures with shells, and some with shapes the human mind struggled to understand. The air buzzed with dozens of languages. Small translation devices pinned to every delegate's clothing turned the chaos into understandable speech. Yundoe stepped onto the central platform. A white spotlight fell on him, and suddenly the entire chamber went quiet. Hundreds of alien eyes stared down at the lone human. For a brief moment, he felt very small, but he did not show it. "On behalf of the people of Earth," he began, his voice calm and steady, "I am honored to stand before this council. We come as friends, we come as partners, and we come ready to share in the work and wonder of this galaxy." Polite applause filled the chamber. Clicks, hums, strange alien sounds that served as clapping. Everything seemed to be going exactly as planned. Trade agreements were discussed. Cultural exchange programs were proposed. A mutual defense treaty was read aloud. Humanity was about to join the galactic community, at least. That was what everyone on Earth believed. Soyan sat behind the ambassador, watching the chamber carefully. She had always been good at reading people, even alien ones, and something in the room felt wrong. Too many delegates were whispering. Too many eyes kept glancing toward the highest seat in the chamber. That seat belonged to the ruler of the Confederation. The Grand Arbiter, he was a member of the Vel species, a tall insect-like creature with a hard black shell, 6 thin legs, and 2 enormous compound eyes that reflected light like broken mirrors. He was ancient. His shell was cracked in places and patched with strips of silver metal. For over 300 years, he had ruled the Confederation, and during that time, no species had ever successfully challenged his authority. When the Grand Arbiter finally moved, the entire chamber went silent. He slowly rose from his seat. His legs clicked softly against the stone floor. One thin arm lifted into the air. A glowing document appeared before him. A holographic scroll written in the Confederation's common language. Before today's proceedings conclude, the Grand Arbiter said in a dry, buzzing voice, "There is a matter of law that must be addressed." The air in the chamber changed instantly. Doe felt it, a quiet tension spreading through the room. He glanced back at Soyan. Her face had gone pale. The Grand Arbiter continued reading. Decree 9907. Under the laws of the Galactic Confederation, any species that has not achieved faster-than-light travel through independent discovery is classified under Section 12 of the Confederation Charter. He paused. Then his compound eyes focused directly on the human ambassador. Section 12 designates such species as servitor class. He tilted his head slightly. In the common language of your world, ambassador, the word is slave. For a moment, there was silence. Then the chamber exploded, but not with shock, with celebration. Dozens of alien delegations rose from their seats, clicking, roaring, stamping their feet. They had known, every single one of them had known. This had been planned from the beginning. Earth had not been invited as a partner. Earth had been invited as a prize. Yundoi stood frozen on the platform. The noise crashed over him like a tidal wave. Soyen gripped his arm from behind, hard enough to bruise the Grand Arbiter raised his voice again. Humanity reverse-engineered faster-than-light technology from a crashed probe. This does not qualify as independent discovery. He lifted the holographic decree. Therefore, humanity is officially declared a servitor species of the Galactic Confederation, effective immediately. Your worlds, your resources, and your labor now belong to the Confederation. Armed guards began entering the chamber. Soyen counted them automatically, point 30, point 40, and more coming through every doorway. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from something hotter, something older. Doi slowly reached up and touched the small communication device on his collar. The device was broadcasting everything live. Every screen, every phone, every speaker on Earth. 0.8 billion humans were watching. He spoke one final sentence. His voice was calm, cold, colder than the vacuum outside the station walls. You will regret this before your sunset. Then he crushed the device in his hand, and the broadcast went dark. Within seconds of the broadcast ending, the guards reached the human delegation. Rough hands forced Yundoi to the ground. Glowing restraints locked around his wrists. Soyen tried to fight them. 2 guards slammed her against the floor beside him. The rest of the human diplomats were dragged away across the chamber. Around them, alien delegates laughed. Some cheered. Others simply watched with quiet satisfaction. For centuries, the Confederation had grown used to power, and today they believed they had just gained another obedient species. What they did not understand was that 8 billion humans had just watched everything. 0.8 billion kilometers away, on a blue world orbiting a yellow star, a man sat alone in a bunker beneath the Pacific Ocean. His name was No Tae-jin, and he watched the screen in front of him go black. For a long time, he said nothing. The bunker was silent except for the quiet hum of machines. Tae-jin had been a soldier for 34 years. He had fought in 3 wars that he had lost. His left eyed a shrapnel in a jungle whose name he barely remembered anymore. For the last decade, he'd been buried inside the deepest military programs Earth had ever created. He was not a man who spoke often. But when he did, people listened. After several long minutes, he opened a locked drawer in the metal desk beside him. Inside was a black folder. Stamped across the cover in red letters were 2 words. Project Iron. Tae-jin picked up a secure phone beside the folder, but he pressed one button. When someone answered, he spoke only 4 words. Wake everyone up. He paused, then added one more. Now. The world did not sleep that night. From Tokyo to New York, from Lagos to Berlin. People stood in the streets staring at the sky. Parents pulled their children out of school. Stock markets crashed within the hour. Governments across the planet called emergency sessions. But beneath the panic, beneath the fear, something else was spreading quietly through the human race. Something dangerous. IT moved through billions of people like electricity through a wired. IT was anger. 3 days after the decree. The leaders of Earth's militaries gathered in a sealed chamber beneath the mountains of Central Europe. The newly formed United Earth Defense Council. Every major nation had sent its highest commander. The room was filled with hard faces and tired eyes. At the front of the room stood No Tae-jin, hands behind his back. 1 good, eyes scanning the chamber. You all saw the broadcast, he said calmly. You all heard what they called us. He paused. Slaves, property, tools. The silence in the room felt heavy enough to crush steel. Then Tae-jin continued. I am here to tell you something important. We are not surprised. Several officers looked up in shock. Taejin raised a hand. 6 months ago, our intelligence teams intercepted communications between 3 Confederation species. They were discussing something called the human acquisition. At 8 the time, we could not confirm their plan, but we prepared anyway. He turned and tapped a panel on the table. The wall behind him lit up. Images appeared across the screen. Hidden shipyards inside asteroids. Weapons factories buried under the surface of Mars. Secret research stations. Floating in the dark spaces between planets. The room went completely silent. Taejin spoke again. Project Iron Wake has been active for 11 months. The screen changed. Now it showed rows of warships. Massive gray vessels under construction. Armed. Waiting. 214 warships, Taejin said. Kinetic accelerator cannons. Pulse warheads. Point defense systems the Confederation has never seen. He turned back toward the Council. They think we are primitives who got lucky with a crash probe. His voice hardened. They are wrong. We are the species that split the atom. The species that walked on its own moon. The species that turns every piece of nature it touches into a weapon. He paused. They should have read our history before they tried to put chains on us. The Council voted within the hour, and Taejin was named Supreme Commander of the United Earth Defense Force. His first order was to contact a woman named Kwon Jian. Jian was not a soldier. She was something far more dangerous. She was patient to a former intelligence director. She had spent 2 years quietly building a network of human agents across Confederation space, trade delegations, academic exchanges, refugee programs. The Confederation had never bothered to monitor them closely. After all, why would anyone fear humans? Now, with a single coded message sent from a relay station hidden on the far side of the moon, Kwon Jian woke them all up. Within 12 hours, information began flooding back to Earth. Fleet positions, supply routes, defense codes, internal Senate communications, and one discovery that changed everything. The Confederation had not fought a real war in over 800 years. Their ships were old. Their tactics were older. Their soldiers had never fired weapons at living enemies. They ruled through law and fear, not through strength. During a secure call, Jian told Taejin something simple. They're a paper empire. Hit them hard enough, and the whole thing folds. Taejin nodded slowly. Then he asked the question he already feared. And the ambassador? Jian hesitated, alive. For now, they're planning a public ceremony. Taejin's jaw tightened. What kind of ceremony? A submission broadcast. They want him to kneel in front of the entire galaxy. Silence filled the bunker. Finally, Taejin said quietly, he won't kneel. No, Jian replied. He won't. And she was right. On Thessera Prime, Yundoi was dragged from his prison cell. Guards forced him into a bright white chamber filled with cameras and alien journalists. The Grand Arbiter stood above him on a raised platform. His cracked shell gleamed under the lights. His compound eyes stared down at the human. Kneel, the Grand Arbiter ordered. Doi remained standing. His face was bruised. His lip was split. His suit was torn. But his back was straight. Kneel, the Arbiter repeated. Point 2 guard struck the ambassador across the legs with metal rods. Doi fell to one knee. The cameras zoomed in. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself back to his feet. Then he looked directly into the nearest camera. Billions of aliens across the galaxy were watching. He said nothing. He simply stood there, bleeding, unbroken. The broadcast had been meant to crush humanity's spirit. Instead, recruitment centers on Earth reported lines stretching around entire city blocks within hours. People who had never touched a weapon before were volunteering. Engineers, teachers, doctors, factory workers. They had all seen their ambassador refuse to kneel, and something inside them had ignited. Meanwhile, in another cell deep inside Thessera Prime, Baek Soyan was watching her guards, studying them, learning their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. Point 2 of them were Red Hani, the quiet four-armed workers who maintained most of the station systems. They were obedient, polite, and Soya noticed something else. They were unhappy. After 3 days, she finally spoke to them, softly. "What are your names?" she asked. The guards hesitated. No prisoner had ever asked them that before. Eventually, one of them whispered an answer. "Kelrin." And how long has your species served the Confederation? Soyan asked. The Ret Hani hesitated again, then quietly replied, For 100 years. Soyan studied his face through the bars. Then she asked a simple question. Would you like it to end? The Red Honey Guard looked at her with wide dark eyes. He did not answer. But he did not walk away either. Soyan smiled slightly. She had just found her first ally. Back on Earth, Supreme Commander Note Jean addressed the planet. Every screen, every phone, every city, every human being watched. He stood in front of a plain gray wall wearing his military uniform. His expression was hard and calm, like a man who had already accepted what was coming. They expect us to beg, he said. They expect us to crawl. They expect us to accept the chains they have made for us. He paused for a moment. They believe we are small, young, weak. Then his voice changed. It became colder, stronger. We will teach them what it costs to chain a species that was born in fire. 6 hours later, humanity launched its first fleet. Hidden shipyards inside the asteroid belt came alive. Massive doors opened, and 200 warships that were never supposed to exist rose into space. Their engines burned bright blue against the darkness, one by one. They turned toward the stars. Then they vanished in a faster-than-light travel. The galaxy had no idea they were coming. Admiral Han Mira sat in the command chair of the flagship. She was only 36 years old, small in height, sharp in mind, and absolutely ruthless when the situation demanded it. The soldiers under her command had given her a nickname, the Blade. Not to her face, of course, but she knew about it, and she didn't mind. 9 days after the decree that declared humanity slaves, Myra's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Stars snapped back into place outside the viewports, and something enormous filled the forward screen. Verith Outpost, a Confederation military supply hub built into the surface of a gray, lifeless moon. From orbit, it looked like a metal city. Hundreds of storage depots, fuel tanks, weapons warehouses, and above it floated a small defensive fleet. Confederation patrol ships. They drifted lazily through space, their formation loose and relaxed. They had no idea they were about to become the first target in a war. Mira leaned slightly forward in her chair. How many ships? She asked. Her tactical officer checked the sensor display. 42, Admiral. Standard Confederation patrol class. Light armor. Energy weapons. No change in formation since we arrived. Mira studied the screen for a moment. They don't think we're a threat, she said. No, Admiral, the officer replied. They do not. For a brief second, Mira almost felt sorry for them. Almost, she opened the fleet communication channel. Her voice carried to every ship. All vessels. Weapons free. Engage at will. 200 human warships fired at the exact same moment. Long magnetic rails inside their hulls launched solid metal slugs at incredible speed. Kinetic accelerators. Simple weapons. Brutal weapons. And completely unfamiliar to the Confederation. The alien patrol ships have been designed to fight enemies with energy beams. Weapons that shields could absorb or deflect. They had never faced something like this. The first human round tore straight through a patrol cruiser. Its hull split open like paper. Atmosphere exploded into space. The ship drifted apart in silent pieces. Then the second ship died. Then the third. Then 5 more. The Confederation fleet tried to respond. Energy beams flashed across the darkness, but the human ships were already moving. Fast, aggressive, unpredictable. Within 20 minutes, the patrol fleet was gone. 42 ships reduced to drifting wreckage. Admiral Mira didn't celebrate. She turned her attention to the moon below. Landing teams, she said calmly. Deploy. Secure the fuel depots first. I want this outpost under our control within 4 hours. It took 3. Human drop ships screamed through the thin atmosphere. Armored soldiers poured onto the surface. They met almost no resistance. The Confederation troops stationed on Verith Outpost were not warriors. They were administrators, inventory managers, clerks, beings who had spent years filing reports in quiet offices. Most surrendered immediately. A few tried to fight. It didn't last long. By the time Admiral Mira stepped onto the gray dust of the moon, the outpost was already flying Earth's flag. News of Eretha's fall spread across the Confederation like wildfire. Emergency sessions were called across dozens of worlds. The Grand Arbiter demanded answers. How? He demanded. How did a primitive servitor species destroy a military outpost in half a day? But the answer was something the Confederation had never understood, because they had never experienced it. For 800 years, the Confederation had lived in peace, comfortable peace. They built laws, trade routes, bureaucracies. They forgot what war felt like. Humanity never had that luxury. Humans had spent those same centuries fighting. Every generation, every conflict, every mistake. They learned, improved, adapted. War was not something humans occasionally did. It was something written deep into their history, into their bones, into every soldier who had ever stepped onto a battlefield. The Confederation had forgotten war. Humanity had perfected it. Meanwhile, on Thessera Prime, Quan Jian's intelligence network continued delivering information to Earth. Fleet movements, political arguments, supply shortages, internal communications. Everything flowed into the human command network. Taijin and Admiral Mira studied every report carefully. They were not trying to conquer territory. They were trying to do something far more dangerous. Break the Confederation's ability to function. We don't need to destroy their entire fleet, Taijin explained during a secure call. We only need to make them afraid. Fear works on every species. Mira followed the strategy perfectly. She divided the human fleet into 3 groups. Each group targeted a different location: at a communications relay station, at a shipyard, and a major food distribution center. All 3 targets were destroyed within a single day. The message was clear. Humanity could strike anywhere, anytime, and the Confederation could not stop them. Panic began spreading. Trade ships refused to leave port. Supply routes collapsed. Species that had supported the Confederation for centuries began whispering a dangerous question. Could the Confederation still protect them? And inside her prison cell on Thessera Prime, Baek Soyan continued her own war, the quiet kind, the patient kind. She had spent days talking with the Red Hani guards, learning their story. 400 years of servitude. 400 years of building stations and ships for masters who treated them like tools. They were everywhere. Engine rooms, maintenance tunnels, power systems. Every major system on Thessera Prime depended on Red Hani workers. Soyan leaned closer to the cell bars one evening. When the time comes, she said softly, I will need the shields down, the security grid offline, and every locked door on this station open. The Red Hani engineer stared at her for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. We built this station. He looked toward the ceiling above them. We can take it apart. Soyan nodded slowly. Then wait for my signal. But time was running out. A message finally reached her through the station's hidden worker network. The Grand Arbiter had grown tired of Yun Doi's defiance. The ambassador had refused to kneel for separate times. Each time he had been beaten, each time he had stood back up, the Arbiter had made a decision. Yun Doi would be executed publicly at sunrise. Soyan sat alone in her cell after hearing the news. She stared at the cold metal wall for a long time. Then she reached under her mattress. From beneath it she pulled a tiny device, a smuggled transmitter, barely powerful enough to reach the nearest relay. She typed a message in a code only Quan Jian would understand. The message contained only one sentence. The ambassador dies at sunrise. Move now or lose him. The signal bounced from relay to relay through the hidden network Jian had built, across stations, across ships, across entire star systems. And less than an hour later, it reached Earth. Quan Jian read the message, closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then forwarded it to one person, Admiral Han Mira. Mira was studying battle reports when the message appeared on her screen. She read it once, then again. Without speaking, she stood up and walked to the front window of the bridge. Stars burned across the darkness outside. New orders, she said quietly. Change course. Her navigator looked up. Destination, Admiral? Myra's jaw tightened. Thessera Prime. The navigator froze. Admiral, that's the center of the Confederation. Their entire defense fleet is stationed there. We would be flying directly into— I know exactly what we would be flying into. Her voice was calm, but something inside it made every officer on the bridge fall silent. Change course. All ships. The fleet turned point. 200 warships pivoted together. Their engines flared bright blue. Then the entire fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed. They had one mission now: reach Thessera Prime before sunrise. The Galactic Confederation had gathered the largest fleet in its history. Around Thessera Prime, 2,000 warships filled the darkness of space. Cruisers, destroyers, carrier vessels, heavy battleships from 12 different species. They formed a shining wall of metal and light around the massive station. Every gun was armed. Every sensor was active. Every commander was waiting. Not because they feared humanity. Not yet. They came because they feared what it would mean if they did not. If the Confederation looked weak, the entire empire could begin to fall apart. The very top of Thessera Prime. Inside a private chamber overlooking space, the Grand Arbiter stood at a wide observation window. His cracked black shell reflected the distant glow of engine lights. His compound eyes moved slowly across the enormous fleet. 2,000 ships. More than enough. The humans would come. The humans would die. And the galaxy would remember what happened to species that refused to know their place. Behind him stood his advisor. The execution is scheduled for sunrise, Grand Arbiter, the advisor said. 3 hours from now. The Arbiter nodded slowly. Good. Broadcast it to every world. Let the humans watch their ambassador die. That will end this nonsense. 3 hours. That was all the time humanity had left to the edge of the Thessera system. Space suddenly twisted. Stars stretched into thin lines, then snapped back into place. 200 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. For a moment, every officer on every bridge simply stared. The sensor displays were flooded with signals. Red dots filled the screens. Hundreds, thousands. The full Confederation armada. Admiral Han Mira stood on the bridge of the flagship Took. Her face showed no emotion, but everyone around her knew the numbers. 200 ships against 2,000. 10 to 1. Her tactical officer spoke quietly. Admiral, they outnumber us 10 to 1. Mira didn't look away from the screen. I can count, she said calmly. Then she opened the fleet channel. Her voice traveled to every ship, every pilot, every Marine waiting in a drop bay. This is Admiral Han Mira. In 3 hours, the Confederation will execute Ambassador Yin Doi. They will broadcast it across the galaxy. They will do it because he refused to kneel. She paused. They believe humanity will accept that. Her voice hardened. They are wrong. Another pause. We are outnumbered. We are outgunned. But we are not outmatched. Then she gave the order. All ships advance. Weapons free on my signal. 200 human warships surged forward. The Confederation fleet reacted slowly, too slowly. Their formation had been designed for ceremony, for intimidation, for grand political displays. Ships arranged in perfect rows, beautiful, orderly, and completely useless when real combat began. Human ships flew straight into the formation at full speed. Then they opened fire. Kinetic slugs slammed into alien hulls. Pulse warheads exploded against engines. Confederation ships scrambled to respond. Energy beams flashed across space, but the human ships were faster, smaller. They darted between the massive alien vessels like fish in dark water, diving, turning, firing again and again. The first wave of battle was chaos, but numbers still mattered. Within 30 minutes, Mira had lost 12 ships. Then 20. The Confederation fleet began tightening its formation, closing the gaps, forcing the human ships toward concentrated fire. Slowly, the trap was closing. Mira watched the tactical display. Ships dying more. Enemies arriving. But she wasn't worried. Not yet, because she knew something: the Grand Arbiter didn't. 11 light years away, on a frozen mining world called Drethos, a Rethani worker set down his tools. Behind him stood a Confederation overseer. The overseer shouted an order. The Rethani turned slowly, looked him in the eyes, and said one word. No. It was the first word of a revolution. Across 12 worlds, it began at the exact same moment. Quan Jian had spent months preparing it. Her agents had. quietly contacted enslaved species across the Confederation. Red Hani, Drini, Earthy.9, other servitor races. Messages had been passed, plans shared, all waiting for the signal. Now the signal had arrived, and centuries of silence exploded into rebellion on Drethos. Miners seized the fuel refineries on the farming world Pellis. Earthy workers shut down food processing plants on dozens of stations. Drini technicians locked the Confederation out of their own communication networks. Supply lines collapsed. Military commanders panicked, and the Grand Arbiter began receiving reports point one after another. Uprising, sabotage, riots. Then the worst news of all. Half of his defense fleet was being recalled. Ships from 6 different species were abandoning the battle around Thessera Prime. Their commanders were rushing home to protect their own worlds. The perfect wall of 2,000 ships began to break apart. Inside Thessera Prime, Bakesoyan made her move. The signal had been given. The Red Hani engineers began shutting systems down. Shield generators went offline. Security doors unlocked. Surveillance cameras went blind. The station's automated defense grid simply stopped working. Alarms screamed through the corridors. Confederation officers ran in every direction, shouting orders no one could hear, because the communication network was dead in the lower levels of the station. Earthy laborers broke open weapons lockers. For the first time in centuries, the slaves were armed. Soyan walked out of her cell through a door a Red Hani engineer quietly unlocked. She picked up a fallen guard's weapon, checked the power cell, then began moving through the corridors. Outside the station, Admiral Mira saw the shield grid collapse. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "There it is," she whispered. She opened the fleet channel again. "All boarding teams, go." Human dropships launched from the carriers. They streaked toward Thessera Prime like falling stars. Explosive charges blasted holes through the outer hull, and armored UEDF Marines poured into the station. Confederation guards tried to stop them. They fought bravely, but they had never faced enemies like this. Humans fought fast, violent, relentless, and no hesitation, and no mercy. Soyan heard the gunfire echoing through the corridors before she saw the soldiers. She turned a corner and suddenly found herself staring down the barrels of 6 human rifles. "Hold fire," she shouted quickly. "I'm Bakesoyan, chief advisor to Ambassador Dowie." The Marines hesitated, then lowered their weapons. "You know where he is?" the squad leader asked. "Yes." "Then move." They ran through corridors that Red Hani engineers had cleared, past barricades built by Earthy rebels, through security doors opened by Drini technicians. Behind them, more and more freed slaves joined the march. Hundreds, then thousands. For the first time in their lives, they were walking toward freedom. At the end of a long corridor stood a massive reinforced door, the execution chamber. They were just in time that a Red Hani engineer stepped forward, placed all 4 hands on the control panel, and ripped the circuitry apart. The door slid open. Inside the chamber, Yun Doi stood on a raised platform. His hands were bound. His face was bruised, his body thin from days of imprisonment. Confederation executioners turned in shock as armed humans flooded the room. The Marines moved quickly. Within seconds, the executioners were disarmed. Soyan walked to the platform, cut the restraints from Doi's wrists. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Doi looked around at the Marines, at the freed slaves, at the chaos spreading through the station. "Is the Senate chamber still intact?" he asked quietly. Soyan blinked in surprise. "Yes, I think so." Doi nodded slowly. "Good." He straightened his torn suit, then said something none of them expected. "I have something to say." Chaos filled Thessera Prime. Gunfire echoed through the massive station. Alarm lights flashed red across endless metal corridors. Confederation officers ran in panic as entire security systems failed around them. But inside the execution chamber, something unexpected was happening. Ambassador Yun Doi calmly adjusted the torn sleeve of his suit. His wrists were still red from the restraints. His face carried bruises from days of beatings. Yet his posture remained perfectly straight. He looked like a man attending a diplomatic meeting, not someone who had been seconds away from death. Around him stood armed UEDF Marines, Behind them gathered hundreds of freed workers, Red Hani, Earthy Drini, species that had served the Confederation for centuries, all watching him. Bake Soyin stepped closer. "We need to evacuate," she said quietly. "The battle outside is still ongoing." Doi shook his head. "No," Soyin frowned slightly. "No. The entire galaxy is watching this station right now," he replied. "The Confederation planned to broadcast my execution." He looked toward the ceiling where surveillance cameras once hung. Some were damaged, some were dark, but a few still worked. "That means the broadcast network still exists." One of the Red Hani engineers nodded. "Yes, parts of it are still active." Doi smiled faintly. "Good. Then we should use it." Outside the station, the battle for Thessera Prime was reaching its breaking point. Human ships continued fighting deep inside the fractured Confederation fleet. Admiral Han Mira stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the tactical display. Enemy ships were retreating. Others were trying to regroup. But the fleet was no longer unified. Too many worlds had begun rebelling. Too many commanders had withdrawn their forces. What had once been 2,000 ships had become barely 1,200. And that number kept shrinking. Her communications officer suddenly turned in surprise. "Admiral, we're receiving a signal from inside Thessera Prime. A broadcast request." Mira raised an eyebrow. "From who?" The officer checked the signal source, then looked up again. "Ambassador Yin Doi." For a brief moment, the bridge was silent. Then Mira nodded. "Patch it through. Send it across the fleet. And across every relay we control. If he wants the galaxy to hear something, let them hear it." Across hundreds of star systems, screens flickered on trading ships on military bridges, inside planetary government halls, across countless alien worlds. The emergency broadcast replaced every other transmission. The image was simple: a single human standing in the middle of a damaged execution chamber. Ambassador Yun Doi, bruised, exhausted, but standing tall. For a few seconds he said nothing. He simply looked into the camera. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "You were all meant to watch me die. Today." Silence filled the chamber behind him. "You were meant to watch a human kneel. You were meant to see our species accept chains." He paused, then slowly shook his head. "But humanity does not kneel." Behind him, the freed workers watched with wide eyes. "You call yourselves the Galactic Confederation. You speak about law, order, civilization. But for 400 years, you have built your civilization on the backs of slaves." The camera shifted slightly, showing the workers standing behind him. "You took entire species and forced them to serve you. You silenced their voices. You erased their freedom. And you believed no one would ever challenge you." Doi took one slow breath. "You were wrong." Outside the station, another Confederation warship exploded under human fire. But humanity did not come here to rule the galaxy. His voice grew stronger. "We came here for something far simpler. Freedom." He turned slightly, gesturing to the workers behind him. "Not just for humans. For everyone." Across the galaxy, millions of beings watched in stunned silence. Today you saw 200 human ships attack the heart of your empire. You saw slaves rise up across your worlds. You saw the Confederation begin to fall apart. He leaned closer toward the camera, and this is only the beginning. His voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous tone. "Because humans are very patient. But once we decide something is wrong, we do not stop." Then he delivered the final line. "If you want peace and slavery, dismantle the Confederation and build something better." He straightened his suit again. "Otherwise, humanity will finish what it started today." The broadcast ended on the command bridge of the flagship took. Admiral Mira slowly exhaled. Her communications officer stared at the screen. "Admiral, that speech just went to half the galaxy." Mira nodded. "Good." Then she looked back toward the battlefield. "Because the other half is about to hear from us." Inside Thessera Prime, the situation collapsed within hours. Freed workers seized control of entire station sectors. Confederation commanders fled or surrendered, and deep within the central tower, the Grand Arbiter watched the broadcast replay. Over and over again, for the first time in centuries, he looked afraid. His advisor spoke quietly. more systems are declaring independence. Several member species are withdrawing from the Confederation, and the defense fleet is retreating. The Arbiter closed his eyes slowly. The empire he had ruled for decades was collapsing, not because of military defeat, but because one species had refused to accept the rules. Humans had changed the balance of the galaxy. Forever. 3 hours later, Admiral Mira walked through the main corridor of the station. Marines stood guard along the walls. Rebel workers filled the halls. And at the end of the corridor stood Yindoi, free, alive. He smiled slightly when he saw her. I assume the fleet survived? Mira allowed herself the smallest smile. Barely. Doi nodded. That will be enough. They both looked out through the massive observation window, across the stars, where human ships drifted beside ships belonging to newly freed species. For the first time, they were not enemies. They were allies. Soyen stepped beside them. Do you think the Confederation will surrender? She asked. Doi watched the distant stars for a long moment. Then he said something that would later be repeated across the galaxy for centuries. They don't have to surrender. They just have to change. Behind them, thousands of freed beings began cheering. And across the galaxy, a new era quietly began. Because the Confederation had made one fatal mistake. They tried to enslave humanity, and humanity had answered the only way it knew how. By changing the galaxy forever.